Can anyone
Yes.
not see? Okay, cool. So sort of like what Neil said, overview of what we went over last time. We host our code for Symbiote 2 on GitLab. It's also replicated out to GitHub, so you can find it there. But if you want to make comments or submit issues or things like that, it's best to go to the GitLab site. And I can put that in the chat or send out another email after this meeting with a link to all the things I'm going to talk about. Like Neil said, if you have specific issues, I only care about this or that, a great way to talk about those issues with us as developers is to go to the GitLab issues list. So if you go to gitlab.com/symbiote2 and click on issues on the left, you can see all the issues that we have open and that I've tagged some of them, starting to get organized with them. So a good example here is something Mary brought up at the last meeting and was sort of seconded by Richard Rabler. And you can see that he opened it up, added a description. And as I've been working, I can comment and say this specific code is for this feature. And if you want to follow it, you can subscribe to it and do things like that, add notifications on the right here. Yep, so that's that, and that sort of leads into what I've been working on. So I've been developing a geography plugin over the past couple of weeks in order to aid us in searching spatially for occurrences. So the first thing I can show with that is the API. So this is publicly available at api.demo.symbiote2.org. And again, I can send out an email after the meeting with that link. And this is sort of what Will's talking about when he says he's been developing with the API. So if you're a coder or a data scientist, this will be really useful and hopefully somewhat familiar to you as documentation. So the big one I've been working on this week is geography right here. And the first thing that I did was pull all of the data from Natural Earth. If anyone's familiar, it's just a UN representation of the world with sort of polygons for every country, continent, and province within those countries. So you can see I've gotten continents and countries up and running. And if I select one specifically, I can get this giant footprint of Bolivia as number one alphabetically. And we can use that for spatial searches. So if an occurrence falls within this polygon, return it to me. So that'll bring us to the UI piece of things. And what I've been using that backend API stuff for is developing this map, the spatial module. So right now it will work if I draw a polygon on this map. I can just click the polygon over here, sort of like Symbiote 1, and it loads up some stuff outside Flagstaff. If I click on them, I get a scientific name, and right now it just takes you to the collection page if you click on that. But eventually we'll get more robust with that search functionality on the spatial module. So it may not look like it, but it's quite a lot of work to get a functioning map and map search. So that's what I've been doing the past couple of weeks. And sort of folding into that geography plugin. If I go to a current search, we now have auto-completed countries according to the UN's view of the world that you can use to search. So if I go to Mexico, we have all of my occurrences from Mexico. Yep, so that's that piece of things. The actual issue that this all stemmed out of was auto-completing the country based on state province. So either when I'm creating a new occurrence or searching for a new occurrence, I type in the state here, and then the country will populate automatically. I assume this would be more useful for actually creating occurrences, right? Because then you have both fields filled in when you save it. But as soon as I've implemented the main functionality of that issue, I'll autofill Wisconsin and it'll give me United States here. Same with creating an occurrence. And so sort of the preliminary work I had to do was pulling all that data from Natural Earth, getting the polygons and references between states and provinces all set up, doing everything on the API, and then creating the map was sort of grew out of that. And next, coming up soon, I assume within a few days or so, we'll have the autocomplete functionality that will actually close this issue from a user. So that's just sort of the life cycle that I go through and did go through this past couple of weeks in order to, directly interact with you guys, the users, and develop what you guys want to see in Symbiota 2. And the GitLab issues are a good tracking mechanism for this. And that's what I use to create all these new features for this week, or this couple weeks. So any questions?
Hey, Evan, this is Curtis. So my question would be about the internationalization of the country names.
Right. So yeah, what's the question?
So the question is probably from the UN database, I should be able to download, country names in Spanish, for instance. And so, so so the question really is, how can we integrate that?
Yeah, totally. So in the database, there is a field for alternative names, I believe. And that's sort of the functionality we would use in order to get country names in different languages. Because you're right, if I look through, they're only in English right now. But it should be fairly easy to extend into other languages. There's also authoritative names. So an administrator can go in, and if they have an alternate name for a specific region or country that they want their portal to defer to, then that'll be configurable as well. And that sort of ties in with the languages. So does that answer your question?
There are some in the chat questions too.
Oh, great.
Right. Just to follow up on this one. So look up country is what you're talking about. And there's only one field. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If we want to look,
we have to think about that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If we want to get geeky with it, we can do this real quick. Oh, that's not what I want. So what I'm doing now is drilling down into the code so I can show Curtis sort of what we're looking at here. Yep, so Curtis, you can see my organization structure here. And then we are using the Geothosaurus, all the tables prefixed by Geothosaurus, Curtis.
Okay, thanks. I'll take a look at that. Yeah, thanks.
Yep. And let me take a look at the chat here.
I can read them out to you if you like. So the first question is about whether it will be possible to do autocomplete for counties in the way that you do for states as well. And if I have some, bizarrely through some COVID work, I have some thoughts about that, but Evan,
Yeah, so as we get more fine-grained down to county and locality, it gets a little bit trickier to do the lookups that way. But we can certainly add that on to the issue, take a look at what kind of performance we'd be looking at, to look up, let's say I typed in Flagstaff, and then we'd have to look up what county is Flagstaff in, what state is Flagstaff in, what country, etc. So you can see it's sort of like, it grows in complexity the more fine-grained you get, but we can definitely give that a shot and see what kind of performance we get for auto-completing all the fields. So
one comment.
So if I might just, maybe I'm about, sorry. Well, I just guess what I was going to say is my kind of COVID comment would be, I think it would be a great thing to look into, but I would be very cautious in doing it because the sort of the standard lookups and localities for this, the GADM format. So you have sort of countries, states, and then regions, counties within that. Essentially, there are tens of thousands of them, if not hundreds of thousands of them across the world. And so we'd want anything we implemented to not just work in the US, but of course the world. And I think it could become a real performance SAP, having a look up for that, because there's a lot of them, and at very high resolution as well, that can introduce quite severe problems for GIS, because some of these county level entries are tiny. And so that can induce weird things performatively. So I think it's something to be careful about as you look into that, Evan, but definitely something to look into, of course.
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of my point, how we increase, what I mean by complexity is performance, right? So the more complex we get with our sort of world or our geography, the more fine grained, the basically the slower it would be to autofill everything. So yeah,
and even within the US, you've got multiple Washington counties.
Right. Yeah.
So Carol had a question about unrecognized countries. And GBIF actually has some territories that it recognizes that you can use, but Somaliland, for instance, we can put Somaliland in. But when it goes to GBIF, they just say unknown country, but maps to Somalia, because they recognize Somalia, not Somaliland.
Right.
So the option to override, instead of making it mandatory, you pick from the pick list, is all that would be needed, I think.
Oh, definitely. So even though there is the pick list here, I can still type in whatever I want. So the override definitely will definitely be available. And also the actual content of your geography in the database is up to the portal, right? So if you recognize something that the UN doesn't, or vice versa, right, you can use whichever you'd like. And then that will show up in the autocomplete. So it's pretty customizable based on the preference of the portal. So.
Right.
Let me look at the chat again.
I'm thinking that Sahib is asking about whether you map it as being native to somewhere or cultivated or introduced. And I think that really comes into a separate aspect rather than the geographic specifications of the collecting site. That's where the geography module that you're looking at comes in primarily, the collecting site.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see if we can, I'm gonna log in and go to the creation page. And of course I don't know my own password. All right. Yeah, so this isn't the occurrence creation page isn't quite up to date, but for things like cultivation or even like verbatim stuff like coordinates or depth or elevation, those are customizable as well. What we're talking about with the geography is, like Mary said, primarily for where the specimen was collected. And I hope I'm saying this right because I'm a computer person, not a biology person, but yeah, so for searching, right, it makes the most sense to have that criteria based on a collection site rather than where a specimen might be cultivated. Mary, am I talking about this correctly?
I think, well, there's two things here. It seems to be concerned about whether the thing is said to be native or not in Pakistan. That's something about the species rather than a collection site. And what we're talking about here are specimen records. So the data we're talking about are the ones associated with a specimen. And so it was collected at this location. There is a field somewhere for its status And I think there's some new extensions for accommodating that. Came out this summer or this spring, sorry. But there's also, in the plant one, at least, there's a cultivated thing you can check off. But that cultivated means that somebody's going up and saying good morning to you and watering you, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
That's my understanding. But it may have been introduced. And a person may not know whether it's introduced from looking at it, because plants don't carry a passport in the field saying, hey, look, it came here from Malaya. All you see is the plant. So you're adding that other information. It's not associated with the specimen. And Symbiota is about specimen records primarily.
Right. And I guess what I can say is we have all of these additional fields for more metadata like that. So entering that data should never be a problem, right? Because not only do we have an abundance of fields by default, they can also be added and removed for occurrences pretty easily. So,
and that's one of the changes in Symbiota too, because in the current version of Symbiota, adding a field is difficult.
Right.
So.
All right. Did I miss anyone?
I think those were the questions I saw. So we need to wake Neil up.
I'm here.
Could I suggest before we wake up Neil, Evan, thank you. That was a fantastic demonstration and also a really good demo of how to use the issues there to sort of raise questions. And I think a really good demonstration of how, if anyone here has some questions and some things that they really have a burning desire to see developed, this is what happens. You type it into that box and then Evan moves heaven and earth and then it appears. So, please, I was going to say, well, Evan, it'd be great just for everyone here, if you could just copy paste the link to the demo site and also maybe even the GitLab site into the chat here again, because I know we've got some new people who it's their first time here. I think they'd love to see that demo site and just see, because the spatial module is great. It's amazing to me, how it's fun playing with it is what I'm saying. I'd encourage everyone to play with it. I've made a lot of, bounding boxes in the last week. So.
Right, definitely.
And I will always include these web addresses in the reminders and invitations and things, because the only person who did not record when this webinar was me. And so I had to rather hastily find it. But, okay, you want the fantastic website, Neil?
Go ahead.
Okay, let me just bring it up.
So for those people that missed the introduction, besides being cheerleaders, Mary and I, our role is primarily to be able to take Symbiota 2 and immediately integrate it into Symbiota portals as testing places. And so Mary's going to go over how she's sort of developing her collaborations in preparation for when Symbiota 2 comes out. Okay, go Mary.
Okay, this is a website I began developing about 2 years ago, but it didn't go anywhere because WordPress is a 5-minute install and a 5-year learning, as far as I can make out. But that's my brain. But this spring, Ali started helping me with it. And so it's becoming actually quite useful. The only problem is that I need to add more content. There's always a need for more content. But the purpose of the website is to provide the background. So using Symbiota, people that are involved with collections at many different levels, students, undergraduates working in a collection, and the collections manager can learn how to contribute to and benefit from biodiversity data sharing. And that's what it's really all about. But at the same time, also to learn more about what it is we're trying to do, that collections people are trying to do and why they're trying to do it, and make people aware that it'd be very useful to learn programming. I'm talking to the younger generation now, and I think many of you do know it, but I sort of managed to resist learning to type, and I wish that I hadn't. So here it's about building knowledge and capacity, one person, one herbarium at a time. And so just on the home page, which is on this one here, it's why using Symbiota, because this is about Symbiota. It's not a general thing. It's about Symbiota. And I love Symbiota because it's relatively easy to learn to use, and it displays information in ways that are very helpful in different settings. And one of the things that we have in Symbiota 2 is trying to make it more obvious how to find these ways. And then we'll go into detail about the collection data, what should be, and I'm a herbarium person, on your label. But similar information, I'm sure, for animals and things like that, judging by what I've seen of notebooks. So trying to give and encourage people to put more data in than you find in many labels, including some of my own. And then another page is going on the herbarium digitization in some detail, how to go about it, how to set up a plan. Wish I'd done that when I started. Discussing alternative workflows and some of the resources available. That's what takes me a lot of time, looking to see what's available now as compared with what I started with. And on the next page, a couple of examples, some of the topics that are introduced. And when I said that I wanted to go over the background to give the information about why we do what you do, or why we do what we do, is an example of that barcoding video that basically just says stick a barcode on the bottom of your herbarium sheet. And it takes me 11 minutes, more than 11 minutes to go over that, because it's trying to explain things like the globally unique identifier, the advantages of having a barcode rather than writing on it by hand, et cetera, lots of stuff. And I would like to make them available as videos and as PDFs, because watching a video is okay once. Second time, you could quickly go into a PDF for doing it. And then on the top right there, I forget that I could do this. That's just an example of a taxon page for those of you who haven't used them much, and maybe plant people use them more, I don't know. But it came about, Iram, I think, is here. She contacted me, she discovered this species in Pakistan, first record of it for Pakistan. And so we put her description up there that she developed, but it gets integrated with photographs that came in from other different people and with specimen records. And if you're wondering why Iram in Pakistan is showing up with a map like that, the reason is basically because I had uploaded a whole lot of records from SciNet, the North American network. And this is an North American, sorry, not a North American, Central American. It's north of the equator thing. So that's sort of dominating it there. And we linked that, Iram created a key that we've shared with Keybase too, and put that one up. And I think that is telling me that this is only supposed to be 5 minutes long and I've talked too long. But anyway, Symbiota to me is it's very much educational in terms of helping people learn how to do things better, more effectively, and not like I learned when I was young, because computers scarcely existed then. Computers exist now. Learning how to use them should be integrated into what our students are learning. So that's basically it. The website will have more on it probably by the next week, but it's going to take a while to develop. Thank you. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Oh, can you unshare your screen, Mary?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ooh, stop share. Yes. Thank you. And I did put, it's biodiversitysharing.org. And there's also a way to contact me through there.
Okay, so yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just interrupt me. And so a couple of things that I want to mention is that, we're trying to make sure all of the functionality that's in Symbiota occurs in Symbiota 2. There are, however, a couple of different flavors of Symbiota 1 now. So for example, the spatial module that Evan was talking about is actually only used in a couple of portals. In doing this though, there have been a couple of things, including spatial module and the taxonomy viewer, where there's two versions available on an existing portal. And so one question is whether we want to maintain, let's say, two versions of the taxonomy viewer. If we want to maintain spatial module, or can we basically, do we want to maintain the Google, what I call the Google Earth search capabilities in Symbiota, or can the open access spatial module maps and technology take over that function and provide a lot more? So it'd be great to get feedback on these various things. So for example, with spatial module, the one thing that was pointed out to us by Eric Eden at University of Kentucky, and that is with the old map viewer, the one nice thing that it did is when you mapped occurrences, it gave you a unique URL, which you could reference forever, and they would put those in their publications. And right now, spatial module does not do that. So minimally, if we were going to try to replace spatial module, replace the map search capacity with spatial module, we would want to retain that function. One nice thing about replacing it is that we don't have to rely on Google Earth and having to spend money, after you've seen, thousands of thumbnails. But those are just like a couple of examples where it's not necessarily straightforward to simply ensure that the functionality in Symbiota is present in Symbiota 2. And Curtis, can I put you on this? Curtis, can I put you on the spot and just at least briefly talk about some of the challenges that you've had to deal with in terms of recreating the taxonomy table?
So taxonomy, the issue here is it's a database issue. The taxonomy is a tree structure, and the databases are flat tables, and so they don't do well with tree structures, basically. So it's basically something that has rich structure. And so in order to, if your taxonomy gets really large, you have to speed it up, because otherwise what you're doing is you're doing a lot of joins of the taxonomy table to itself, essentially. You're trying to reconstruct it dynamically, this tree structure from sort of a flat structure. So you're building, every level in the tree is a database operation that's expensive. And so if you have many levels in the tree, and for a typical taxonomy, you have, 10 levels, maybe fewer, but you have more than 5 levels. It gets expensive to build that up. So what people do is they do tricks at the back end to make that work faster. And so they tried several different ways in Symbiota with different approaches. And they didn't always link everything up together. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to reconstruct this taxonomy while remaining faithful to the Symbiota database that's grown organically over time in maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing fashion, or the most helpful fashion, I should say. And so that's really the challenge. Is sort of an internal one, a database one. Does that make sense, Neil?
Yeah.
So if I might put that in sort of like because I sort of bridge a bit of biology, I'm definitely a biologist, but I spend a bit of time programming. For those of us who aren't so familiar with sort of tree structures, it's a bit like that problem in phylogenetics, where there are more possible rooted trees than there are atoms in the universe for like remarkably small phylogenetic trees. It's a related problem to that, essentially. It becomes difficult to deal with large phylogenetic trees. And of course, taxonomies have a link onto phylogeny in a way that I won't go into. But anyway, if that's a helpful analogy for the problem, then great. And if it wasn't, pretend I said nothing.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, we can end for the day. And so it seems like...
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure who to address this to, but first I want to start off and say that the API has me excited beyond belief, because I feel like anything I could ask can be done with that in the back end. So my question is about, we've become accustomed to some of the aggregated data features that come with SciNet, particularly things like duplicate discovery. Do you have any plans to mimic that ability to be able to do duplicate discovery or any similar things across different Symbiota portals?
That's an interesting question. Across Symbiota portals, so it definitely helps if we're set up with globally unique identifiers. But I don't know if that's uniform across portals. Jason, what type of functionality specifically do you like to see in SciNet with regards to duplicates?
So with in SciNet, there's a component where you can go, I forget the exact navigation, but basically you can say, I have a J Smith 100 collection, and it will go across other portals and find matching that collection for that particular collection number. And if it has already been transcribed and digitized, you can use that to transfer the parsed metadata into your own record, because it's a duplicate with identical label data, essentially. So that's one example of how that aggregated data can be used across different portals and across different collections.
Yeah, that definitely sounds useful and like something we should include. I'd have to take a look specifically at how SciNet is doing things. Most of my experiences are with the Scan and Open Herbarium portals. But yeah, I would take a look, and I'd expect to see more regarding those types of features as I get a little bit deeper into the occurrence plugin, is what we refer to like specific modular functionality is. So yeah, I think I'll open up an issue for that and delve into a little bit deeper. Thanks for the question, Jason.
And that actually brings up another thing that I think it's I don't know whether it's North American or European, but there's a habit of putting in a collection number. And I find a lot of people don't have a collection number. And I'll confess that I lose my field notebook, so I'm not that wonderful on this. But the duplicate discovery, you want to find Smith with the collection number, not all his 100,000 collections, but a particular collection number. So it goes in with that too. But this relates to the business about making Symbiota being a tool for education as well, for providing more useful information, because it's not your grandfather's world, nor your grandmother's, come to that.
Right, definitely. And I think this fits in well with the sort of Darwin Core and CSV import export stuff that we definitely have planned on the development schedule. So when I come to that, expect to hear more about it. So
I just wanted to add, I mean, the fact that you were excited by the API there means this has probably occurred to you as well. But within the R package, it will definitely be possible to do similar sorts of queries across portals and indeed across data sets as well. So, you know, this kind of problem of you know, duplicate discovery is something you have to go through whenever you're dealing with, you know, any sort of occurrence data that's been aggregated from places. And if you'd like, actually, when I'm putting together the demo for in a fortnight's time, I could maybe try and do something using something along these lines to kind of contrast data downloaded from a Symbiota portal to GBIF or something. But again, in ways that are probably, you know, those of us who are used to working with kind of data in those kinds of environments like R or Python have probably got a few routines to do this anyway. But again, the Symbiota package sort of supports things like that as well.
Difficulty I've found with GBIF is that the equivalent information to collector and collection number date can appear in different places. And so this is where it comes up that, you know, we do really need to know what goes where. And yeah, it was interesting trying to integrate the two.
well, and for what Will's talking about, API access, remember that the demo site's public. And so if anyone feels the need to mess around with a bunch of plant data publicly, feel free, because it's out there for you to take a look at. So.
I think we have someone else with their hand up. James Mickley.
Yes, I have a couple questions actually. So Evan, I thought I caught a glimpse of an editor page for a specimen, and I was wondering how far you've come with sort of the collection tools, the back end of this, where the collection managers work.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely useful stuff. And sort of my workflow right now is based around collections and occurrences plugins, as we call them. And so, yeah, so like I believe Neil said, expect to see all the functionality that you expect in Symbiota 1, in Symbiota 2, as far as editing collection data. Let me double check and see.
Well, so I'm thinking about, beyond that. So things like making labels and working with loans and all that sort of day-to-day business type stuff.
Right. So let me show you what we have so far. So here's the massive Arizona State University fruit and seed collection. But if I click the edit button after I'm logged in, and I've been specified as a collection manager for everything. So if I go to my collections tab in my user profile, you can see all the ones I manage. And then if I click the edit button, we have the basic metadata, right? But I would expect to see more of that day-to-day management stuff appear in this sort of area, which is all part of that collections plugin that I'm working on. So if there's something you definitely want to see right away, feel free to fill out an issue. And if not, just expect to see more features, come out as I do the demos here. So.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, are you planning to have additional API endpoints at some point?
Oh yeah. So those are constantly evolving, just like the front end, clicky
Sure.
stuff is. And basically everything, all the data is going to be available via the API. Everything you might want to access, as far as the whole database really, should be an endpoint that's easy to use for you. So anything specific you're looking to see?
No, I thought of like annotations and images, but they don't necessarily have to be split out into separate endpoints, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. So once we get to the images plugin, which is definitely a big one on the list as well, yeah, I expect that you can post to a specific endpoint and update the annotations for the image. So
cool.
Yep.
So let me clarify that the front end communicates to the back end through the API, and so for us to do anything on the front end with images, we're going to have API endpoints for those images. So they'll definitely be there. Right.
It's a direct one-to-one. So.
And let me also go back to the previous question about this duplicate detection. That's a very intriguing issue. And so from a database perspective, this problem is called entity matching. And there's literally 30,000 papers on this one topic of matching entities in one database with entities in another database across a whole range of different. And so what I'm saying is that there's lots and lots of techniques to do it. And one of the great things about the API is that it'll allow those techniques to be employed, because you need the ability to look in both databases and through those API endpoints. And so I think that that is a add-on feature that is cool, not just for collection duplicate detection, but all kinds of other stuff going on with Symbiota database to detect duplicates and pull in data if you're missing it from some other database. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add is I think it would be great to maybe work out the use case of like duplicate discovery using the API. But once we kind of settle on how that might work, I think it needs a nice, slick user interface, because the people who are actually doing this aren't going to know the API, and they're not going to know a programming language. A lot of times they're volunteers or curators who aren't working on the technology side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say is there will likely not just be one tool, but there can be a range of tools, because this is a data mining issue. There's lots of techniques, and so if I have some specimen using data mining, I can detect inconsistencies between the data. So even if they don't match up straight away, I can say, oh no, these actually match with these particular inconsistencies taken care of. So there's lots of very subtle, very smart techniques to do this, and so I see not just one tool, one way to do it, but a bunch of tools.
Right, and I envision possibly you may have one place to go for duplicate discovery, but we could, let's say that's an app, but then we can plug in different techniques within that, different scripts or whatever, where someone can use a different drop down and say, I want to use, Curtis Dyerson's method, and choose that to do duplicate discovery, and then someone else can use a different one for a different technique.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's
good.
Sorry, Gerda.
No, go ahead, Evan.
I was just going to say that's the beauty of like this modular plugin based architecture that we've adopted, right? Because if you don't like the way we developed it for the default, you can change that, and you can change it on both the front end, and you can change the API endpoints based on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to change. So, yeah.
I think there's already an example of using it differently, because from the geolocate, however it's integrated into Symbiota, I don't know, but there it brings up the specimens that have similar information in the location data, so that you can try and georeference them all at once. So, unless your point is well taken, Smith 100 is probably going to be a difficult specimen to look for duplicates on. Smith being a common name, last name.
If I might add one thing as well, sorry to be sort of jumping around a bit, but again, as Evan was saying, these are great examples of the powers of plugins, and also please do leave some issues, and then we can sort of track this and we can start working on some of these things together. I just wanted to say in that vein, James, your comment there about labels, I'd love to know a little bit more about what you mean there. Particularly because very early on at the start of this project, we actually, myself, Mary, and a very talented graduate student, Sylvia Coninuation, who, by the way, is looking for a postdoc right now. Anyway, Sylvia developed some really great label tools that we were intending to be, potentially interoperable with things at, later points in Symbiota's development, when the plugin framework was sort of coming along. Which it is now. So if you've got particular requests, particular things you'd like to see, please do put those up there, and then we can look into that and have a conversation about it together.
Well, I guess the basic thing I would like to see, which Symbiota 1 does not do well, is the ability to print labels off of database records and also customize those labels in a whole variety of ways. So, you'd have very different labels in different taxa, plants versus fungi or something like that. But you also might have a particular style for your herbarium or for a particular collector or something like that. So it'd be nice to have a bunch of different customized labels that could be saved onto that portal or that collection.
And the other one, though, I don't know enough about animal collections, is that somebody has got one, or some people that will print off the kind of thing that entomologists stick on a pin in 6-point typeface. And so, the ideal would be you come in, you've got your collections, you sort them, and you're ready to put them into the collection, and you can print the label that goes with it, with enough sticking out with a barcode or a QR code or something that they can be read, and then you can add the name. But I don't know enough about insect collection labels, let alone anything bigger, a fish or something. So
Well, so the great thing is there are some, so that's lovely. And so let's make sure we make it an issue about this so that we keep track of it. The great thing about the Symbiota 2 API is that, to translate from sort of, let's call it Evan and Curtis speak to like me speak, is this API lets different programs talk to one another. And so there are existing label software things. And now that we have an API about Symbiota 2, it might actually be possible to take existing bits of label software that are pretty cool and do that job really well, and put a wrapper around it, put a little, just make it a bit easier to link the two together, basically. And so if people have particular, I know a lot of entomologists do tend to do this themselves in Word when it comes to making those labels. But if anyone has something that isn't Word that they like using to do this, then it would be great to, please do let us know what that is. And then maybe we can make it so that your favorite software that you already use works with Symbiota 2. And I think actually that would be better probably than us making a new plugin, because it means you don't have to learn a new program. It just means Symbiota 2, is easier for you to use. So if there's a particular bit of software people use, let us know, and then maybe we can link it up. Unless it's Word,
Neil, you're muted.
Is the loan management feature in Cernec, is that only on Cernec, or do other portals use it?
The which one?
Well, Carol Ann McCormick said the loan management feature in Cernec works very well. And so my question is, how many portals use that loan management feature? Oh, I think Carol can't speak, so she has to type. But so that would be an example of actually looking at Cernec to see how they do it, and make sure that that's duplicated if everybody agrees that it's a great feature.
Yeah, the loan management fields are something that sound familiar from Symbiota 1. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then now we can potentially end. And so the next session will be 2 weeks from now, and I'm assuming it will cover our Shiny, whatever advances Evan has made in the spatial module, and hopefully Curtis can give an update on taxonomy tables and other things that come up, like that was mentioned at this meeting. So with that, then I will stop recording.